We are going to try to keep this as concise or not take up too much of your time. Um, so perhaps we can get started. Thank you so much for joining this session. Um, we're really excited to be able to share with you, of course, just some of the basics of the Severity Index for those who are less familiar, and also provide some case studies and some enhancements that we've been able have the opportunity to make over the past year, and some some announcements on forward-looking pieces that we're doing. So thank you for joining. We can move on to the agenda. Thank you. So just a bit of housekeeping as always. We're going to try to keep this to about 60 minutes. Apologies if we run a bit over. We, of course, have allotted an hour and a half. So really, of course, really welcome the Q&A at the end. If that's okay with everyone, please keep yourself muted and we will monitor the chat box. So please do feel free to comment there. The feedback is, of course, really helpful to us. So what we're going to discuss is of the Severity Index, just an overview of what it is, how it's used, a bit on the methodology, how we actually do the data processing, and some enhancements that we've made, future projects that are projects that I should say are ongoing that we will get to implement hopefully in the immediate future. And we have a session by Eugene that provides some case studies to help kind of illustrate the utility of the index, and finishing off with a demo by Farah of a new tool that we've been developing that will help to visualize the severity index. So I'm just going to introduce everyone, or my colleagues, quite quickly, and then they can introduce themselves later on. But I'm Olivia. I've just spent about a year at ACAPS, senior analyst and the product manager of the Severity Index. Also in this session, we have Farah, who is our data scientist, who works on the Severity Index, of course, other bits and bobs for the Crisis Insight team, and Eugene, who's our information analyst focusing on the Severity Index. And I should have said that we are within the Crisis Insight team, which is one of the teams in ACAPS. You might be familiar. We have, of course, global operational hubs, and we are part of the global team that does some of the global tools such as the Severity Index, the Humanitarian Access Index, Risk Radar, and other global pieces. So it would be really helpful to us if we could issue a poll. Just a few questions, shouldn't take more than 3 minutes. That will help us with today's session. Evans, if you don't mind issuing the poll. There we go. Hopefully everyone sees it. Okay, I think we have a good number of responses. Um, I think we can move on. Thank you for that. Going to end the poll. Okay. Thank you. So just as I was saying a bit about ACAPS, hopefully many of you know a bit about us and what we do, but of course we're an independent analysis organization. We have operational teams, as I said, in various parts of the country, and we're part of the global team that is responsible for global monitoring of emerging crises and manage various global tools that are meant to support the evidence-based decision making. We also offer training and capacity support mainly at the local level for local responses. And of course, all of our reports, our tools, everything we do, scenarios, is all really meant to support an evidence-based approach for humanitarian response. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just quickly, a little bit about what is INFORM in case, again, unfamiliar. INFORM stands for the Index for Risk Management. It started over a decade ago, and it's a project that's an interagency project. It's a collaboration of UN agencies. The European Commission's Joint Research Center is kind of the scientific body behind all of the analytical tools. It also includes donors and other humanitarian data experts that make up the steering committee and the technical working group. We as ACAPS, we implement the Severity Index in close collaboration with the Joint Research Center. All of the products are very similar in nature in that they're all quantitative analytical tools, and they all maintain the same principles in that they're global, they're accessible and open and transparent. Just a bit of a plug, but next week in Geneva, it will be a hybrid session. There will be a session on INFORM warning. I will also be there on that panel, as INFORM Severity Index is a crucial part of the INFORM warning tool that is being developed and to be launched very soon. Thanks. We can go to the next slide. So how is it used? Why should you care about the Severity Index? I think there are a lot of sessions at HNPW about this, but humanitarian needs are outpacing the shrinking budgets. The humanitarian data space, obviously, it's really experienced this massive disruption with US funding cuts, humanitarian reset. So tools such as the Severity Index become really critical for decision making, prioritization, and supporting decisions to allocate increasingly limited resources. The tool itself is used by a wide range of actors, UN, Red Cross, NGOs, government donors, to allocate funding, monitor risks, advocacy, research, you name it. But I'd say its primary utility, at least that we know of and we get feedback on, is that it's serving as a resource for benchmarking allocations against a holistic severity assessment. That's really its aim. Next slide, please. So just quickly about what is it, in case you haven't seen it. We produce the Severity Index in two formats at the moment. This is a picture of the Excel version that is released on a monthly basis. Sometimes we do release it twice a month, depending on whether there's a major development. So, for example, when Hurricane Melissa happened, we released the index to, of course, include Cuba and Jamaica. We're working on, of course, on Iran-related risks to include in the Severity Index. So we do try to release it and update when there is significant impacts that we can include into the index. I'd say it's most up to date and most easily accessible through our API, which we maintain. But the Severity Index, sorry, just to get a bit more on the last slide, thanks. It's really unique in that it's a one-of-a-kind global index. It's synthesizing over 30 indicators into a composite score to both evaluate severity at the local and country level. This dual approach has been there since the launch, since the inception, and we really believe it to be really helpful because it highlights hotspots within existing crises or within countries. So our more operational users use it to monitor trends and developments within countries within crises to get that different subnational variance in severity, and then also, of course, for cross-country comparisons. Next slide. Thanks. So just a bit about the concept of the model itself. So as I said, it's an index that weights over 30 indicators across 3 dimensions. You have the impact, with your more volatile changing indicators, such as displacement, fatalities, injuries, people affected. The conditions of people affected is the most important dimension in terms of weighting, and that has people in need estimates, and then the severity breakdown of each level of people in need. And then the complexity is a magnifier of those two with the lowest weight. And that, of course, includes, as it shows on the left-hand higher bubble, the structural indicators that are updated on a 6-month basis that do define a country in terms of its vulnerability to shocks. And then just last thing to say, apologies, last slide, is not the previous slide, is just that as many of you know, or I should mention that the index, while we have pre-vetted or regular sources that we use for various indicators, especially on complexity, increasingly so on impact, and that's something that we're working on, is that automation of particular indicators and sources. We also really do believe that we need to maintain the human analysis layer that starts at the point of data collection. And this is especially true in the changing data environment where assessments and data are perhaps not available consistently or as frequently as we might have previously seen, especially when the methodology was written in 2019. So this analysis at the point of data collection is super important for the volatile humanitarian data environment. And also to say something that we're working on in particular and is a current feature within the index is the reliability assessment that we put into each source that we choose in each indicator. Thank you. Next slide. Farah, over to you.
Thank you, Olivia. So as Olivia mentioned previously, the index brings together over 30 indicators across 3 different dimensions, combining them through a structured weighting and averaging approach. So let's dive deeper into the dimensions. So first and foremost, we have complexity. This dimension assesses structural, societal, and operational factors that complicate humanitarian assistance and intensify the severity of a crisis. It focuses on key indicators like GDP, safety, security, and the ACAPS Humanitarian Access Index, which is, side note, an ACAPS composite indicator, which assesses the constraints that limit humanitarian access reach during emergencies. So the complexity, it carries the lowest weight because it defines a baseline, rarely fluctuates. It's updated every 6 months. It makes up for 30% of the severity index after mathematical processing and aggregation. Moving on, we have the impact dimension. So the impact of the crisis evaluates the magnitude and the depth of a crisis's effects. So the magnitude refers to an absolute scale, so people or the area affected, while the depth reflects the relative scale, so the proportion of the population impacted within a given area. These are derived from displacement and fatality figures, which are the some of the key indicators. So it has a high weight as it's the primary driver of monthly score volatility. So meaning it contributes to the fluctuation of the index. It's most likely to cause the index to change over time on a monthly basis. So it makes up for 34% in total of the final severity score. And lastly, we have conditions, which is our highest weighted dimension. So the conditions of people affected aggregates individual level humanitarian conditions into a crisis level severity score. So it uses a 5-level scale that captures the number of people in need alongside physical, social, mental, and economic impacts of the crisis, informing prioritization and response efforts. Its key indicators are people in need, which we call the PIN figure. Very important figure within analysis, by the way, as well as the crisis severity broken down into 5 different levels. So it carries the highest weight because, as it says here, it captures the depth of human suffering, and it is a good reflection of the concentration of the conditions within a crisis on a mathematical level. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we've answered the why and the what, let's move on to the how. So, how do we apply human analysis, and how does data dispersed across over 200 sources get consolidated into a complex statistical model for use in analytical applications? So the ACAPS data flow pipeline begins with using our clearly defined indicators and vetted sources. This is outlined in our data collection manual. We do keep these things documented. The data is collected and reviewed by our expert analysts. In addition to this year we developed a tool in-house that automatically checks for human errors. And on top of that, we have a highly trained team of mixed methods analysts who quality assure the data. The reliability is then reviewed and triangulated by cross-checking multiple independent sources to verify its accuracy. And after multiple phases of internal review, the data is finally input into the severity index, which gets published monthly on our website, as well as the ACAPS API. And finally, from there, the severity index is modeled into analytical applications such as the SI dashboards, which you'll see later on in this presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'd like to bring you up to speed on where things are in the evolution of the severity index model. So in 2026, we'll be upgrading the severity index to include some key changes. Starting with the updates of the complexity dimension indicators. We revised the recentness criteria for existing data and replaced selected complexity indicators with sources that are more up-to-date and more reliable to improve accuracy and make sure that the model is consistently current and up-to-date and robust. Next, we have the upgrade in the conditions dimension. We changed the way that we calculate it. So we replaced a fixed scoring model where very different conditions could end up with the same score, with a continuous method that weights each condition by its actual intensity, producing a more precise and proportionate result. So in English, that means that statistically speaking, we made the conditions dimension much more realistic. And then we have the rounding next on our list of upgrades. So previously, the severity index model includes rounding of the scores throughout each phase of the processing of the model. What we did is we removed rounding during the processing phase because we want to improve transparency and we want to preserve the precision throughout the calculation. So only the final severity score is rounded up to the nearest first decimal place. The rest of the calculations on the severity index are their raw values. And finally, and I guess most obviously, you will see once we release it, is the scoring scale changes. So we transitioned from a 0 to 5 scoring framework to a 0 to 10 scale to enhance granularity and improve differentiation across results. So this shift ensures the full alignment with the broader INFORM suite, such as the INFORM warning product, which Olivia mentioned earlier, which also uses a 0 to 10 score. So this way we have a greater consistency, comparability, and full integration across the INFORM products. So I'll pass the mic back to Olivia now to talk about some of the next steps.
Thank you. So just quickly for the sake of time, so in addition to the methodology enhancements, we've also been quite fortunate to think about how we want to adapt the severity index with the changing humanitarian data environment. So as many of you are also thinking about and kind of grappling with is should we see, a lot of the data points that or sources that we're really reliant upon to produce the index, if those were to go offline or be less frequently shared and less coherent, how are we going to continue to produce an index that intakes a lot of IPC data, GIAF, OCHA produced PIN, et cetera? So we're doing research at the moment and various testing of the index with different types of data to be able to adapt the index in the future. So we've undertaken a data audit or an evaluation of the various sources that we currently use to understand our dependency on various sources. We're also kind of tightening, I would say, our analysis and our methodology on assessing reliability and ensuring that the reliability index within the severity index is functional, because we think that's a really important tool that's actually not used within the index. Often we see users take the score, but perhaps disregard the reliability assessment that goes alongside with that score and with that crisis, as well as each dimension has its own reliability. And then, of course, we're looking at how we can find some efficiencies within the way that we produce the index and ensuring that we remain consistent across crises. And then we're also starting some work around novel data. So particularly for those crises where there is less publicly available information, I would say, more traditional humanitarian sources, assessments. Are there other data sources that we're not currently thinking of that perhaps sit outside the humanitarian coordination information landscape that we could be utilizing, thinking about satellite imagery, as well as other proxies that would make sense for particularly those where we have a lot of information gaps. Thank you. Okay, so on to the next part. Over to you, Eugene, for some of those case studies. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivia and Farah. So my name is Eugene. I work as an information analyst with ACAPS. particularly dealing with severity index. Again, I want to thank you for attending this session. So, as you've heard, like this is kind of a deep dive session, but not that deep. So, in humanitarian analysis, we've often assumed that if two crises have the same number of people in need, uh, they must have the same level of severity. But before we start this session, we had asked you a few quick poll questions, and it was interesting to see how you guys responded. Thank you for that. So, for example, a few of you expected Sudan and the DRC to have very similar severity levels because both have extremely high number of people in need. Others also felt that crises like Myanmar and Yemen are too different to be comparable at all. And when we asked about Ukraine and Somalia, there were mixed reactions, which is exactly what we hoped to see. Those reasons and instincts are all reasonable and understandable because in humanitarian analysis, we often rely on scale indicators, for example, number of people in need, displaced figures, or fatalities, so as to understand how severe crisis is. But the INFORM Severity Index looks at a crisis differently. Instead of asking how big is the crisis, INFORM tends to ask how severe are humanitarian conditions experienced by the affected population. So to answer this question, the INFORM model, as Farah had explained earlier, it combines several dimensions. These are the impact of the crisis, the conditions people face, the complexity of the environment, the operational constraints, and how concentrated severe conditions are within a population. So rather than measuring scale alone, INFORM helps. It helps us understand the density of severity within a crisis. So let's go back to the poll questions and test some of those assumptions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, so this is a Sudan versus DRC comparison. So a few numbers of you indicated that Sudan and DRC should have similar severity scores, mainly because both crises involve extremely large numbers of people in need. But I'm also glad that majority of you thought that this should have different severity scores. That's good. And at first glance, it makes sense that one would think they should have similar severity scores. This is because both countries have, in our scoring system, both countries have like a maximum score of PIN that is 5.0, meaning like a very large proportion of the population requires humanitarian assistance. But when we look deeper into how severity is distributed within the population, the picture becomes like totally different. Uh, for example, in Sudan, approximately 1/3 of the population is classified in severity level 4, and about 5% are already in level 5. So, which represent level 5, for those who don't know, like level 5 represent a catastrophic humanitarian condition. And on the other hand, in DRC, we also see a very large number of people affected. But when we look at the share of the population in the highest severity levels, the proportion is significantly lower compared to that one of Sudan. So for DRC, like only around 5% of the population falls into level 4 of the severity level. And also we do not have anyone like for now in DRC who is classified under level 5. So that's how like Sudan comes up in our total severity score. So what INFORM captures here is not simply the size of the crisis, but how intense the conditions are relative to the population. So Sudan's crisis is more severe in terms of population saturation, because a much larger share of the population is experiencing extremely severe humanitarian conditions. And on the other hand, the DRC crisis is very large and complex, yes, but most extreme conditions affect a smaller proportion of the population. And this is why INFORM identifies Sudan as more severe, even though both crises are extremely large, with the largest number of people in need. So this is our first example of how severity can differ, even when the scale appears similar. Next slide, please. Another comparison was between Myanmar and Yemen. So we asked the audience whether Myanmar and Yemen feel like a comparable crisis. Most people instinctively said no, and the reaction makes sense. Myanmar's crisis is largely by territorial fragmentation, conflict dynamics, and some access restrictions. While Yemen's crisis, on the other hand, is often described as an economic collapse combined with long-term institutional erosion. Yet, when we look at the INFORM Severity Index, these are different when you look. These crises are different when you look on them on the paper. Yet, INFORM Severity Index scores both the crises the same. So this is because INFORM Severity Index is impact based rather than hazard or vulnerability based. In other words, the model does not categorize a crisis based on what caused them. For example, like whether the trigger was conflict, economic collapse, climate shocks, or maybe governance failures. Instead, the INFORM Severity Index, it measures the humanitarian consequences of those events. So the impact dimension, as Farah had explained earlier, it captures the human consequences of the crisis, such as how many people are affected and how severe their conditions are. And still within the model, the impact dimension is weighted more heavily than the complexity. Farah had already mentioned this. This is because the impact dimension reflects the direct humanitarian consequences experienced by the population. So even though Myanmar and Yemen have very different drivers, the humanitarian conditions experienced by the affected populations are similar enough that they produce the same overall severity score. So this is a case where we show that we may have different crisis drivers, but we also, within this difference, we might also have a similar humanitarian conditions experienced within those two populations. So now let's look at another comparison where the crises look very different. That is Ukraine versus Somalia. So again, when we asked about Ukraine and Somalia, uh, the responses here were quite mixed. When I look at the results, yeah, they were quite mixed, 48 and around there. So this is quite understandable because Ukraine is widely understood as a high intensity conflict with large scale displacement and widespread infrastructure damage. But on the other hand, Somalia is usually described as a chronic fragility crisis, which is driven by repeated droughts, climate shocks, food insecurity, and long-standing governance challenges. And despite these very different crisis systems, INFORM places them within a similar range. I know that's quite shocking for many, but you see, in Ukraine, severity is largely driven by the sudden shock to infrastructure and services caused by the high intensity conflict. We all know about the war between Russia and Ukraine. While on the other hand, in Somalia, severity emerges from repeated climatic shocks, interacting with bad governance. So while the drivers are very different within these two countries or crises, the humanitarian conditions experienced by affected populations, they can converge at some point. So one crisis here is primarily shock driven, while the other is structurally entrenched. But INFORM allows us to compare them because it measures the conditions people are experiencing, not the narrative of the crisis or the headlines in the newsletters. So this is exactly the type of comparison that helps analysts move beyond headlines. So it helps the analysts like look at the conditions of the affected people, the impact and all that, and avoid doing the analysis using the headlines in the newsrooms. Next slide, please. So what have we learned? Across these comparisons, a few patterns become very clear. First, the number of people in need alone does not explain severity differences. Secondly, the distribution of severe conditions within the population is very critical. As we compared earlier, like a country which has people in level 5, cannot be compared to a country which has only people in level 3, and so on. So thirdly, operational constraints and crisis complexity act as multipliers that amplify humanitarian impact. So a country which has less access of maybe humanitarian aid workers, like would rank higher in the severity score compared to a country where access is not limited. So by combining these factors, the INFORM Severity Index helps us distinguish between crises that are large, crises that are structurally fragile, and crises where severe conditions are concentrated across large parts of the population. So INFORM does not simply measure how many people need help. It measures how difficult the humanitarian environment is for those people who need help, and also for those people trying to help them. And now that we've explored how these dimensions shape the severity score, I think Farah will now walk us through a live demonstration showing how changing these factors affect the score in practice. Thank you. Over to you, Farah.
Thank you, Eugene. So, as previously mentioned, we're developing a dashboard which will enable users to explore how different indicators contribute to overall crisis scores, and to understand how individual indicators can influence the final results. The dashboard we're developing also enables, it's really good for comparative analysis across countries over time. It highlights trends and shifts and relative differences in performance. So as promised, let me walk you through the dashboard, give you a sneak peek. Hold on. Okay. Okay. Hopefully my screen is visible. All right. So here it is. It may be overwhelming upon first glance, but luckily we have this handy dandy panel over here, which clearly explains the instructions in case you get confused. So you have the option to select whether you want to view the crises on a country level or just the crisis level. So for today, we're going to be presenting only the country level. You have the option to show the top N crises up to 10 crises at a time on the screen on this graph right here. So right now we have 3 selected, and you can observe the top 3 crises within the severity index that have the highest scores, so most severe. You can filter using these buttons. They're also good to analyze severity based on which category it falls into. So let's say I want to get the data on how many very high severity crises we have. So we can see that there's 18 active across 16 different countries. And let me clear that real quick. If you'd like to select the date range, you can do that as well with the date filter. And something that we found that analysts find very useful is to be able to filter by driver. So let's say a crisis is driven by conflict and maybe food security, and we can see the data for both. Not only can we filter by drivers, we can also observe the dimensions across the severity index and view the highest scores for these. So here's conditions, here is complexity, and last but not least, we have impact. So let's say I want to make my life easier and just search by country. We have a geo search bar over here. So today we want to look at DRC as well as Sudan. So as Eugene mentioned, they contextually may be very similar, but they differ in scores. And we can see here the difference between their scores. And we can jump across the different dimensions to see where they're the same and where they differ. So there's a big gap in complexity, which is the heaviest weighted score. I'm sorry, conditions and complexity, they have the same score, but it doesn't impact the overall severity score because it's the lowest weighted. And then we have impact, which again, they are different. So that's why we have those differences. So let's say I want to dive into the raw figures that go into the severity index. We can do that as well. We have a page where we can view each crisis by its indicators. So we have the fatalities reported, and you can view the raw figure, people affected, people displaced, and the people in need percentage. You can also toggle between the crises which you want to compare, which is something we found very helpful, instead of having it all in one place and a bit messy and confusing. So that's it. We plan to get this out, publish this dashboard pretty soon. There is a data explorer in the works, so we will be announcing it as soon as it's released, and you can find it on the ACAPS website. Back to Olivia.
Thank you. So that completes our session really. And we have about 10 minutes or so, or as long as anyone can take for any Q&A. We would also love to hear any thoughts on the dashboard that we're working on. It's part of a wider project to make the severity index more accessible and user-friendly, particularly for analysis and for those with perhaps in need of quick information. Thank you, Ariana, for your question in the chat. I hope I answered it. Oh, I see. Yes, go ahead, Nabil.
Hi, good morning from a sunny Brussels, and thank you so much, Olivia, Farah, and Eugene, for the great presentation. My name is Nabil. I work with UNDP, focus on fragility and crisis, and I worked previously with OCHA in Palestine. So I haven't used Inform directly before, but we did in Palestine use 2022, 2023 multi-sectoral needs assessment, which was very useful because it informed not only the humanitarian partners, but also the development partners of a joint, we had joint indicators, which were both humanitarian and development based. And it did inform the humanitarian and development response. So I am wondering if the indicators that are used, sorry, I am quite new on this, but if they are strictly humanitarian or if there are also some, indicators that speak more to the development side or the conflict prevention, peace building side, which will, help promote an HDP Nexus approach. Because having been in some sessions already in the Humanitarian Network Partnership Week, the talk is always, HDP Nexus always comes up. So I'm wondering, how could this be used to inform an HDP Nexus approach? I'm also wondering when using Inform, if it's possible to filter. You mentioned there was 30 indicators, right? More than 30 indicators. Is it possible to filter these 30 indicators if I only want to, see the severity based on some specific ones? And I did also notice that on the impact level that, you look at fatalities, but do you also look at, so first, sorry, many questions, but are the fatalities directly linked to the crisis or are they also indirectly linked to the crisis? And how do you make that distinction? Do you also look at casualties? So not only fatalities, but also casualties. So yeah, many questions, but it was very interesting. And yeah, thank you so much. Over.
Thank you so much for the question. Really interesting, and I really appreciate all of them. So I'll start with your last question. Casualties is quite difficult. If you look at various crises, we're very reliant on ACLED for the fatalities figure, and the injuries we have more information gaps. if you have any advice on this, would be very much welcome. But again, some of these questions that we have around sources often come back to, is the source accessible, globally comparable, available for many types of crises, so we can ensure that all the crises that we are analyzing maintain global comparability. So this sometimes does restrict sources. For example, Palestine would be a really good example where we have to be quite careful in terms of the casualty reporting that we do. You can filter the indicators. I'd say, though, personally, as in previous jobs, I found that always a bit difficult within the actual Excel format. The API, I guess it should be easier. But that's also the point of developing this dashboard, is that you should be able to toggle between different indicators and see how they change over time and compare them cross crises. So that's the aim through the data visualization that we're building. On HDP Nexus, really interesting question and a very much a live conversation for us actually at the moment. As I think there is, and maybe we can pick this up actually offline, because it'd be very interesting to discuss, or with others as well. So yes, the complexity dimension. So that it was built with the intention that it does have those developmental indicators. It has, for example, while we have fatalities that are linked to the actual crisis in the impact section, which is weighted more. In the complexity dimension, we have another indicator, which is exposure to conflict intensity. And we also have operational access in there. We also have rule of law. We have empowerment, some of your more, the Human Development Index related indicators. We have GDP, which are updated on more of a 6-month basis. So I would say those are well covered in the complexity dimension, however, weighted lower. And also many of those can be found in INFORM Risk. But I guess the question is still quite interesting, because I think when it comes to deciding whether to open or close a crisis, we often are looking at population affected and people in need due to a traceable kind of emergency level of acute need. So there's lots of conversations that we have, for example, about kind of trying to delineate between chronic versus acute, and this tool really being more focused on acute needs. Because I think sometimes there's some confusion in the tool itself about whether we're including caseloads that are very vulnerable to shocks. But that's more covered in INFORM Risk, whereas INFORM Severity is much more focusing on people who are in need of humanitarian assistance, and the shock has manifested in emergency levels of need. And to just lastly, I don't think I answered it, the fatalities figure is connected to the crisis itself. So for example, if we have a drought crisis, the fatalities you'll often find are an information gap, actually, because we often don't know how many people have died due to intense drought. And this links to a lot of conversations we have around actually mortality and disease, and that being really difficult to actually include in such an index, because when a drought starts and ends is very difficult to trace, and in terms of actually measuring those impacts along that time horizon is really difficult. I hope I covered your questions, but thank you for those. Really, really helpful and interesting. I don't think I see any other hands. Just looking in the chat. Yes, so Hans, the dashboard will also have a feature where you can select the time horizon that you want to analyze. Yes, you can select the drivers. We find that a lot of people use the index to analyze different crises in different parts of the globe, but similar drivers, to see how they have different levels of severity, which we will certainly have in there. Collect and publish INFORM scores. within all countries. Ariana, I'm going to try to answer your question. So we wouldn't have a severity score per admin. We really look at the analysis really starts with the driver. So what's the development that's then resulting in an impact that is significant in nature that results in a population that may be in need of humanitarian assistance. It will capture on if you look in way back in the Excel or through the API, it will have the actual admin areas that are tagged that are affected by that driver. But I'd be interested to perhaps unpack that with you because I can understand how having there are other tools out there that I'm aware of. For example, I'm forgetting the name of it now, but it looks more at an admin area or pixel level to kind of give you a scale of severity. But we're quite focused on the driver analysis, as that helps us to then determine the landmass affected, determine the population affected. And again, also helps us to, I think, differentiate between chronic versus acute as well. Okay. Go ahead, Isabel.
Yes. Good morning, Olivia, and thank you very much to you all for this excellent presentation. So you mentioned that now we will no longer have a maximum score of 5, but of 10. And as you know, we use INFORM Severity together with INFORM Risk in our funding allocation methodology and algorithm. So what is the impact on the calculations, and how did you go from 5 to 10, just to get an idea on how we have to factor that in our algorithm? I mean, no need to go into the details, but if you have some elements of guidance.
Sure, yes. Farah, do you want to answer that question on the actual implementation of the changes?
Yeah, sure. So the reason why we changed to a 0 to 10 scale is because we want the INFORM Severity Index to align with the other INFORM products, such as INFORM Warning. They all use a 0 to 10 scale. We thought that it would be best to have everything integrated on the same level. And as far as how the value changes, the doubling of the score. So having it on a 0 to 10 score doesn't necessarily mean that it will double it won't double precisely, is what I mean, because there's different rounding that happens across the phases, which now we've removed, and different changes across the dimensions, such as the different complexity indicators that we have now, and the changes to the conditions calculations, which went from a fixed approach to a continuous approach. So you will find that there will be differences. It won't be an exact doubling of the score, but it's still that, I mean, if you would like to integrate it with the products that you already have, what we did is we kept the INFORM categorization. So whatever category it falls into, from low severity to very high severity, we kept that on the 0 to 5 scale because we saw no purpose in doubling it. Whereas the severity score itself will have to make some tweaks in our dashboards or whatever analysis tools are being fed the already present INFORM severity data. So we just adjust those to input the data on a 0 to 10 scale instead of 0 to 5. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So, but you have done the categorization to align it with INFORM risk. So now the same index value has the same categorization as INFORM risk, or are there differences in the values?
Olivia, maybe you can
So
answer.
high risk, for example, starts from level 5, if I remember well, or 5.1. Is it aligned now with INFORM severity, or are there differences?
I'm not sure. Olivia, maybe you can answer this one.
Yeah, so the classifications, so the score will a score in INFORM risk and INFORM severity may differ, but the categories will align. We need to double check those ranges. We're still in the process of implementing it, because it's not as far as it's not just the doubling. We've also made the calculation actually more precise by moving away from the 5%. If it's falls within over 5%, that then results in a score. So for example, if you have your PIN in level 4, and that's over 5% of the population affected, then that's a level 4 for that dimension. But now we've changed the calculation to be an averaging, so it factors in all of the levels, which is actually a much more precise way of calculating it. So the two changes at once, it might not be exactly aligned, 5.1 in risk and 5.1 in severity. I need to double check this as we're still in the process of implementing, but we'll get back to you on exactly how that aligns. And that's actually a really interesting piece of feedback, Isabel, because something that we've been talking about at the Joint Research Center is, do users use the classifications more? So are they going straight to, is it very low, low, medium, high, very high? And we're going to maintain those classifications. Or are they going to the 4.1, the 4.2?
Yeah, well, in the commission, we use both actually. For the moment, in our algorithm, we use the exact value, but then when it comes, and especially in these times, when it comes to the selection of countries, we may look at what is a high risk country, a high severity, and looking less at the exact figure behind the high. But as soon as a country is a high, then this or that. You see what I mean?
Yeah. And you're not going to see it, for example, if a country last month when we had the 5-point scale. So this new methodology will be released in a week. And countries that are in the very high bucket are going to maintain in the very high bucket. The changes to the methodology won't affect the classification.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you.
And congratulations. It's a huge and great work you did.
Yeah. No, it's good to be aligned, especially as we were mentioning with INFORM warning being on a 0 to 10 scale. It'll make it easier to read across all the products. At least we hope. Especially as INFORM warning will be a projection of INFORM severity pins and the score, so then it's an easier read across.
Yeah.
I don't see any more questions. Thank you, everyone, for participating and allowing us to go a bit over time. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. We did try to make it a bit methodology light, but if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I will put the presentation in the chat. As on the next slide, there are some helpful links so you can access all of our resources, which on our website you'll find the data collection manual, the methodology that we've upgraded and that we've talked about briefly, as well as we put the latest versions of the Severity Index, and you can sign up to our register for our API there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.